We will start now with a small delay. My name is Katarzyna Chimiak, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this conference on behalf of not only of the Institute of Public Affairs, but of the whole project, National Integration Evaluation Mechanism, measuring and improving integration of beneficiaries of international protection. This project is run by a consortium of 15 NGOs and academic institutions from across Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula to the Black Sea, and from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean region. Let me present this organization to you. This is from Greece, Antigona, Information and Documentation Center on Racism, Ecology, Peace and Nonviolence. From Romania, Center for Public Innovation. From Spain, Barcelona Center for International Affairs. From Bulgaria, Association Multiculti Collective. From Lithuania, Diversity Development Group. From Italy, Foundation ISMU. From Milan. From France, Foundation Terre d'Asile. The Maastricht University from the Netherlands. The Malmö University from Sweden. From Slovenia, we have in our team the Peace Institute. From Czechia, People in Need. From Latvia, Providus. And from Hungary, our today's host, the Menedek Association for Migrants. Thank you very much for having us here. From Warsaw, the Institute of Public Affairs, which is the leader of this project. And the Migration Policy Group based in Brussels, which is the research coordinator in this project. This project is also a part of a parallel project centered on the Visegrad countries under the title Visegrad Countries National Integration Mechanism. It is a project run by, apart from already mentioned organizations from Hungary, Czechia, Poland, also by an organization from Slovakia, Marginal. The NIEM consortium has been fortunate to have the support of a great cadre of strategic partners, some of whom are with us here today. This is Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Policy of Poland, Ministry of the Interior and Administration of Poland, University of Warsaw, and the UNHCR. It should be underlined that the NIEM's research draws on the work of the researchers of the groundbreaking project Refugee Integration Capacity and Evaluation, conducted by the UNHCR from 2011 to 2013. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved in this project, in the NIEM and in the V4 NIEM, so this project centered on the Visegrad countries. This is a joint effort started in 2016, and all organizations mentioned contributed to this conference. Of course, this event, as the project on the whole, wouldn't be possible without the support of the donors. The project National Integration Evaluation Mechanism is co-founded by the European Union through the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, the International Visegrad Fund and Foundation Open Society Institute. And this conference is also supported by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which we are also very grateful for. I also want to extend my thanks to our host, the European Youth Center, for their hospitality and all people providing us technical support today. As you have heard, the NIEM is a pan-European project, sophisticated as the European Union itself, but also powered by a shared belief that migration policy must be followed by integration policy, and that integration policies towards beneficiaries of international protections can and should be improved. The key aim of this project is to provide key actors in the integration field in the European Union with evidence on gaps, integration standards, and to identify promising practices and evaluate the effects of legislative and policy changes to better prepare the European Union to face current challenges regarding migration and integration of refugees. I sincerely hope that you will join today's debate and networking, of course. And thank you for your participation. And now I'd like to welcome Professor Antar King from the MENADEC Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here and represent the MENADEC Association for Refugees and Migrants. My name is Antar King and I'm the president of this association. It sounds very, very nice, I mean, to be the president. Actually, frankly speaking, my role is much less active than more symbolic. Thanks to András Kovács, who is the executive director of the MENADEC. Of course, we have a lot of talk about the mission of the MENADEC and what we are doing, and plus every week I have to sign a lot of paper on behalf of the MENADEC. When I arrived, actually, I had immediately to sign a lot of papers, but I'm really proud that the MENADEC is a very important actor in this project, which I feel is extremely interesting and important in our time. Then I started to think about what should I say, and my first impression was that the title of the conference is extremely challenging. Differences matter, and I started to think about what does it mean differences matter, and then I thought that maybe I try to translate. As I'm a sociologist, I try to specify it. What does it mean that differences matter? And I thought that it really matters that millions of people must leave their country to escape from being persecuted. And that's a very important and very dramatic thing what needs a lot of help. And it also matters that there are so many countries where human life is unbearable, ruthless and threatening. Again, we cannot forget this factor in this whole story. It also matters that we need to welcome and help refugees in need. And it also matters that host societies must be inclusive and understanding and not hostile against the newcomers, the strangers. And it also matters that the host countries must guarantee the human dignity of the refugees, providing them humanitarian care, solidarity, and fair treatment and procedures. And it matters, and then when I arrived to the topic of this conference, that not only must they be welcomed, these people, but also they must be given a chance to get integrated into the new place where they finally arrived and they want to stay there even for shorter or for longer periods. So it's an extremely important task what these people need, and need us, and need the experts, and need the politicians, and need the societies and such. And I think this NIEM, this all-in integration project, we can expect that they brought very useful and significant contributions. How could we deal? How can we follow the standards? How we can help the politicians to use good measures to have this integration process to the people. And of course, we can help the societies to let them teach how they can tolerate and be inclusive toward the refugees. Okay, I saw that this is, let's say, this is when I try to synthesize the title. And then this morning, I was in trouble that, okay, I'm a sociologist, so what should I contribute by my own? And then what came into my mind to talk about, very shortly, about the past, because we can learn from the past, and we can learn from the experiences from the past. And then few days ago in Hungary, we celebrated the 63rd anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution in '56. And there was a lot of talk, and we were talking about the freedom fighting and about how this society stood up and fight against the Soviet Union, and just, you know, get back their sovereignty and the liberties. But I never heard anything mentioned about those 200,000 people who left Hungary in a very, very short time, during 2 or 3, maximum 3 months. I know that this migration wave very strongly differs from the recent migration flows, but still, what I was thinking, what is the message of the this situation when so many people, not because they wanted to live somewhere else, but because they didn't want to live and stay in Hungary, which was again occupied by the Soviet army. And I saw that the fate of and that in my life, when I was traveling in different countries, I was fortunately talk a lot of people who left Hungary in '56, and I was curious what happened with them and how they could achieve a kind of positive end to their life. And I concluded to three important factors which maybe can give us some inspiration. What should we concentrate on when we are thinking about the recent refugee flow which affected Europe, the countries in Europe, and including Hungary? The first, what I want to mention, is that what is very important, and in 1956 or 7 was a crucial moment in their life of these people, these 200,000 people, was that there was a very positive welcome. And that's very important. When they arrived to Transkirchen, actually, I don't know who knows the place, Transkirchen, which is on the Austrian side of the border, and there was a camp where they were collected and they had to wait to get a permission to go ahead and find their destination country. So that was a very, very nice treatment. And the procedure, how they were, how the authorities dealt with these people was very, very, very good. So I think that's one message, I think, what we can learn from the past. The second, because this whole story is not one-sided, that these people who finally, because the situation in Hungary, which forced them to leave the country, they were extremely motivated to get integrated. So without this motivation by the people, by the refugees, it's very difficult to achieve a success. But on both sides, by the refugees and by the host countries, by the host society. So this is the second very important moment. And the third one, which may be less evident, this is the role of the education system in the host countries. I think it's crucial. These people who arrived to their destination place, they wanted to find a job, but it needed expertise, knowledge, education. So they were enrolled. The education system in the US or in other European countries or in Australia, anywhere they finally arrived, the education system and the education policy was very helpful. And not only it was limited to the school-aged generations, but even the adults. The adults who arrived to the US, they were given scholarships, and they started an education. And it's not simply the issue of the professional expertise that and next they could find a good job and they could start to build their own life, but also the environment of the university system. Because they were together surrounded by native people, they learn what does it mean to live together with others, and they were accepted by the people, by the native young, or not maybe usually young university students, that, okay, these people need an extra help. and they got it. They received this extra help. That's why I almost never met anyone from this generation, this group of people from Hungary who left Hungary, who could not finally achieve something. To achieve, you know, that they could have a normal life, and they were not, their life was not different from the native people's life. So I think these three messages, if we keep in mind from the story of the 56 revolution and the Hungarian refugees who left the country, maybe it should add some extra knowledge how we can deal with the recent people who must leave their country and must start a new life somewhere else. So actually that was the essence what I wanted to tell you. And again, I think that this project, when I went through the results on the web, look very, very inspiring, very interesting. And if, hopefully, the major actors, the politicians, should listen to this project and the results, the life should be better in the world. And plus, especially in this country where you are now, and maybe in this beautiful building with this fantastic view, you don't realize, but I checked the Eurobarometer research from a year ago, and in Hungary, there's the strongest rejection of the strangers among the countries of Europe, and that's a shame. That's a shame, and we cannot forget that not only the politicians must be convinced how important this thing, but also we have to care about the people who have very, very negative attitude toward the migrant and the refugees. Thank you so much, and I hope that you will enjoy the conference, and thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all the NGOs who were participating in the project and finally could give a new knowledge about integration of the refugees right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I would like to ask here Ms. Montserrat Feixas-Vihe from the UNHCR, the regional representative for Central Europe. Please, thank you very much.
You know, a few weeks ago, I was writing a paper on the asylum situation in Central Europe. And once again, I was struck by the seeming paradox. On the one hand, huge challenges. On the other hand, very low numbers of asylum seekers as well as refugees right now. It's really something to consider, especially when all over the world the number of forcibly displaced people is the highest ever, more than 70 million people. So in this situation, one wonders, should UNHCR be supporting integration in Central Europe? Does it make sense? Especially when, as it has been mentioned, many countries in this region are openly hostile to refugees as well as to foreigners. There are governments that keep erecting barriers. They are putting more and more obstacles trying to dissuade people from coming here and seeking asylum. And to be fair, at a time when many people who come to the borders to Central Europe, people who are coming from countries where there is conflict, people who at a glance are in need of international protection, but people who only apply for asylum if they are intercepted or to avoid detention, or people who, after applying for asylum, often leave the countries before the asylum process is over. So, should we be supporting integration? And I thought that maybe I should, for the ones who are not fully familiar with UNHCR, I should just refresh your minds about where does UNHCR stand when it comes to integration of refugees. You see, from UNHCR perspective, there are 3 durable solutions for any refugee. The first one, the one that we put at the forefront, is voluntary repatriation. We think that the best possible thing for a refugee is to be able at one point to go back home in safety and dignity, of course. But the fact is that conflicts are longer and longer, and that reconciliation and reconstruction are even longer. So the effective chance for people to go back home and have a peaceful life, a life in dignity, is a solution which is increasingly difficult to achieve for many. Another durable solution is resettlement. We think that resettlement, taking someone from a country of refuge to a third country, is actually often, many times, it's a life-saving device. So it is extremely important for us, and that's why we keep trying to persuade countries to expand the numbers of resettlement places. We try to also convince them to open up what we call complementary pathways to allow refugees to move to third countries. But in all fairness, resettlement is, the numbers are low, and very few refugees will ever have a chance to be resettled. So the fact is that for the vast majority of refugees, the only solution, or the most likely solution, is going to be integration. And because of that, we actively promote and facilitate integration. And we do so at the global level, at the national level, at the local level. So for us, it's extremely important, and that's why we support it. And we are delighted that the European Union has been increasingly supporting integration, providing more funds, and also supporting projects like NIEM. And as you know, we are also sponsors of NIEM, and we are very happy with NIEM. We are delighted that it has taken a new impetus, because we think that NIEM fulfills a very important role, which is the role of evaluating whether the systems are working. Because let's not be naive. Integration is a very difficult, a very complex process, a complex that takes often many years, sometimes generations. It's a process that has many dimensions, an economic one, a cultural one, a legal one, very many dimensions. And to put everything together is difficult. To make it happen is difficult. It is a demanding process, both on the part of the people who want to integrate, but also on the communities that are hosting them. And a lot of resources are devoted to it. So it's important that NIEM has this purpose, this system to evaluate whether the way it is happening, the policies in place are actually having an impact, whether there are gaps to be addressed, whether there are ways to improve the systems, and hence we think that it is an insurance towards better integration in the future. That's why we are fully supportive of NIEM. You know, I like to go back to my question. I said, should we be supporting integration? You know, in this region, I know that many of you are coming also from other parts of Europe, but let me talk about this region, Central Europe. The fact is that, as I mentioned before, many countries are actually hostile to asylum seekers, to refugees. And they are doing so actually failing their international obligations because they are obliged to provide asylum. But not all countries are like this. You know, next to these very bad systems, these very bad practices, this active xenophobia, we are also seeing some countries that have interesting integration programs. We see some good initiatives, and some of them actually present a lot of promise. So the picture is not as dark as one would think. It's a mixed one, and hence the importance of actually supporting integration. And, you know, when it comes to us, and whether we should be supporting it or not, I was thinking, you know, I remembered a few years ago, maybe you heard it, I don't know, but UNHCR developed a public communication campaign around the figure 1. And basically it was, one refugee without hope is too many. One family without shelter is too many. So it was all about 1. And I thought that as we talk about integration, if I take advantage of this 1 approach, I would say that 1 refugee who is ready to make the effort to integrate is worth supporting. First of all, because it takes a lot of courage, a lot of effort to try to integrate, to make the effort to integrate in a society which is less than welcoming. Second, because anyone who succeeds in integrating deserves support and applause. But also because one person who integrates successfully in a given country is actually the seed, we hope, of many more to come. And the global asylum system will only be sustainable and will only be sustained if every country participates. It is based on international solidarity, and we need every country to participate. And by having one person, one refugee, succeed in integrating in a country, it is opening the door to many others who in the future may equally be in need of international protection. So yes, we are ready to support integration. We think it's worth supporting, and we are prepared to do it even if as little as one person is prepared to make the effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, please let me welcome here our keynote speaker, Thomas Huddleston from the Migration Policy Group, which, as I told you, is the organization coordinating research done under this project. And Thomas will explain you how NIEM evaluation actually works. Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Huddleston. I'm the research director at the Migration Policy Group in Brussels, and I was also the initial designer of the NIEM that began here in Budapest in 2009, which is 10 years ago. And I want to explain to you how this tool grew, coming from the need identified by national governments, UNHCR, and non-governmental authorities to better understand how integration policies could actually be a reality in this region. And how wonderful that actually this region gave birth to a tool that was needed at the most critical moment in time for Europe's migration policies. Now, we are not going to immediately change reality. Integration as a process is a long-term, multi-generational process. We've seen from monitoring integration policies that integration policy change is also very slow because of politics and capacity. And we also know that changing public opinion is also a very slow process. But we believe at the Migration Policy Group and with our partners and donors in NIEM that bringing the right information to the debate will help all of us as a community of practice and of research find the best ways that we can move forward integration processes, practices, and public opinion. So why monitor refugee integration? I believe that UNHCR Budapest office already explained very well. Montserrat, who was there, I remember when we launched the pilot of MyPEX, understands very well the need to understand how long-term integration is probably the most durable solution for most beneficiaries of international protection. However, we realize that while there's a strong international and European legal framework that's sometimes followed up also by national policies and strategies, there are gaps because integration involves all areas of life. And so many different policies and administrations and practices that do not know who refugees are and do not understand what are their specific needs. Needs that are due to their experience and reasons for migration, but also due sometimes to the traumatic experiences and delays that they experience when they arrive in Europe and in our countries as they undergo their often long asylum procedures. So while we have a strong normative international framework from the Geneva Convention and from European law, we need to better understand how those norms can really translate into policies and into practices that all of us can use in our own ways to improve the integration process. So that's why the National Integration Evaluation Mechanism was designed, because unfortunately there were not these types of ways of measuring integration policies and practices, or even integration outcomes for beneficiaries of international protection. Not in 2009, when we began this work, and even not in 2015 and 16, when Europe faced this large scale of arrivals, while there has been a lot of information provided on migrant integration in general across the European Union, information on the specific needs and gaps for refugees was critically missing, and NIEM tries to fill this. So I think the key to understand the areas and the grounding of NIEM is to understand our international obligations on asylum. I have always said that for me, the Geneva Convention is actually a mechanism for integration, because most of the articles in the Geneva Convention concern the rights that refugees should have in areas like employment, housing, health, social security, but it also obliges states to expedite the process of integration and of citizenship acquisition. So the Genevan Convention gives us a strong basis on integration, which is also well complemented by our other international UN instruments that guarantee key civic, political, and human rights that also apply to beneficiaries of international protection. In Europe, this international framework has been anchored in the European Convention on Human Rights and the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, and the work of the European Convention and the UN conventions have then been anchored into not only European law as part of the common European asylum system, but also the exchange of good practice on integration that has been facilitated by the European Union. Each and every NIEM indicator is linked to one of these normative frameworks. And this is one of the major challenges that all of us have, to go beyond our values and our norms and abstract terms like human rights and translate them into key practices. This is a challenge that you have when you are a policymaker and a practitioner, to go beyond the words and actually create actions. This is what NIEM allows you to do, looking indicator by indicator to see where policies are well developed or underdeveloped. So the NIEM is the largest set of indicators that I have ever dealt with. I would think it's actually the largest set of indicators on policy and practice at the international level, because NIEM does not just look at law and policy. It does look to see what are the general legal framework in place for refugees and beneficiaries of subsidiary protection. But it then also goes further to see whether these laws have been translated into strategies, action plans, proactive policies and services. And then it goes further to look at the state of implementation and collaboration, because these strategies and action plans must then be translated by administrations and service providers and NGOs into concrete services that overcome particular administrative obstacles, practical obstacles, that offer sufficient support, and as you see, are also sufficiently resourced in terms of their financial and human resources. We also then look to see whether countries are providing the missing data on the integration outcomes of beneficiaries of international protection, whether they are conducting regular monitorings and evaluation, and eventually would allow us to compare integration outcomes for beneficiaries of international protection. At the moment, we lack this really in-depth data so that we can compare the integration outcomes of beneficiaries of international protection over time and across countries. So this brings us to the NIEM, which is the largest civil society-led integration project in Europe, which began in 2016 and will continue until 2021. So this measures the quality of the different government policies for integration by looking at all of the different aspects of integration policy and practice with individual indicators. And this set of indicators is a tool that can be directly used to see where there are gaps in government service provision, where there are particular needs of beneficiaries of international protection. And we present this as an overall roadmap so that you can look at each of the individual indicators and make a choice about the changes that you think are feasible within your particular context. So the NIEM consortium not only provides this data for you, it also undertakes analyses of the national situation, of key themes across Europe, and it brings that analysis to national advocacy coalitions of national organizations that want to find ways to fill those gaps and address those needs by changing policy and practice. We hope that by 2021, we will be able to measure the progress that these advocacy coalitions have been able to make with governments in improving policy and implementation. So I wanted to tell you a bit of the history of this tool, again, to understand its usefulness for you as an actor today. I began working on the NIEM in 2009 here in Budapest with the UNHCR Budapest office, and we brought together over a series of workshops the national governments, the main service providers, and research and experts, some of whom are in the room today, in order to identify which of the areas of integration are most important and which are the elements of integration policy most important to take into account. And it's from those workshops that we realized that one, it was extremely necessary to look not just at policy, but also implementation. And two, that it was very necessary in this area to have multi-stakeholder collaboration. Understanding refugee integration was not going to happen simply by turning to one government department. It was going to require gathering information from so many government departments who hadn't worked together on refugee integration. And it would also be key to gather information from service providers and NGOs who know refugees on the ground, as well as to work with the very few researchers and experts who had been doing independent research and providing some of the only data that we had in this area. So we put together a tool that can be used by governments in collaboration with NGOs and researchers in order to monitor integration in various areas. And this began in 2012 and 2013, concluding again here in Budapest, to look at the situations in Bulgaria, Czechia, Poland, and Slovakia in key areas of integration, such as employment, family reunification, language learning, and so on. And this tool showed us that it was very useful to really provide everyone all of the results so that people could see on each indicator where was the strengths and the weaknesses in their policy. But it was also very useful to compare within regions, particularly here in Central Europe, where we could find good practices in every country, in every area. Now, I would like to particularly thank the Institute for Public Affairs in Poland and UNHCR Poland for taking the initiative and to seeing the value of making the NIEM a regular assessment for all of Europe. It was their initiative that turned this into a transnational action funded by the European Commission as part of the Polish national program of the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. Unfortunately, we were not able to start the project in time for the large number of arrivals. However, the timing was very auspicious. It did allow us to start to use all of these indicators to understand where we are going in Europe on refugee integration. So one of the first analyses that we produced in September of 2016 analyzed the European Commission's proposed reform of the Common European Asylum System in order to see whether these proposed changes would actually improve refugee integration on the ground based on our indicators. And there we were able to identify gaps in the proposed legislation that could be improved through negotiations of the Parliament and the Council. We have also been able to bring this tool to Turkey, where the NIEM tool has been critical to understand the achievements but also the gaps in the EU's facility for refugees and in Turkey's first integration policy and strategy that was put in place, where we found important gaps for many groups in need of international protection. And that brings us to today, where we will be able to have a perspective on the changes made in 14 European countries from 2017 to 2019. So you will receive the freshest data that no one else has seen before. And I hope that our data will help you to decide new priorities for your own organization's future work on integration. The NIEM looks at really all of the major areas of public life, not only the starting point for beneficiaries of international protection when they leave the reception system and need support to get access to the mainstream services in all areas of life, but also then their anchoring in the country through a secure legal status with their family reunited together, and then different ways to participate in all of the key areas of socioeconomic and cultural life. These will be the subjects of this afternoon's workshops, where you will be able to learn in detail what types of indicators you can find in the NIEM and what best practices NIEM has been able to identify in all of our countries. But I wanted to give you some overall trends from what we see in NIEM. Now, our debates on integration often focus on best practices and bad actors, let's say. And unfortunately, that's really not the reality. While we have many indicators of best practices, around 17% of countries have some type of good practice score somewhere, and around 21% really have critically missing areas of integration. Most of the time, 62% of the time, we are looking at areas of relative strength and relative weakness. So this means that we might have gaps in law, which we have tried to fill with some good implementing measures, or we might have excellent laws on paper that we have yet to fully implement in practice. We might have an excellent framework on legal rights, but weak policies on socioeconomic participation. Now, what does this mean in terms of the integration support across Europe today? Well, the initial NIEM and our update show that despite the presence of EU standards, we still have enormous variations across the European Union. So just as we still in Europe offer an asylum lottery, which says that your chances of protection are pretty much based on the country you've applied in and not the country that you're from, so too are your integration chances more based on the country that you've moved to than really the skills that you bring, because countries are still so divergent in the state of development of their integration policies. We also find that there are major gaps across different policy areas, so it's extremely rare to find a country that really has a coherent, integrated approach to our areas. And lastly, we also see a great variation within regions. So, for example, here among the Visegrad countries, we find the Czech Republic often leading not only in this region but across Europe, with its state program for integration and its dedicated budget, with its mainstreaming policies in areas such as housing, education, and language learning. There are good practices to find everywhere, and there are leading countries in all regions of Europe. Now, there are, in terms of the thematic results, to try and understand where we generally have strengths and weaknesses across Europe, in terms of people's rights to reside, reunite their family, and become citizens, here we do often see strong legal frameworks for refugees, but we still have gaps for beneficiaries of subsidiary protection, who are large in number and, as I said, often obtain this status due to the asylum lottery in Europe, rather than a different need for protection. But more worryingly, across all of the areas that we've looked at, including your right to reunite with your family, become a permanent resident, or become a citizen, we find that beneficiaries of international protection suffer from major administrative and practical obstacles in order to access the rights that they deserve under European and international law. So for us now looking ahead with a new European Commission, a new European Parliament, it is key that we address this gap in implementation in the common European asylum system. We have had over 1 million people obtain protection in Europe since 2015 and 16. All of these people are entitled to family reunification, to permanent residence, and when we designed the EU migration policy back in 1999 at the Tempora Council, we also agreed that they needed a path to citizenship. So it is really key at this moment, now that people have obtained status, to look over the next few years whether these people are able to uptake their rights in practice. This is an obligation for all of you and for our governments, because the lack of uptake of family reunification, permanent residence, and citizenship is often due to key administrative and practical obstacles. Secondly, one of our key challenges is implementation. So here you see the average scores for 13 of the NIEM countries across all of the different dimensions, and we look to see whether there are strengths or weaknesses in the legal framework, the policy framework, or in the level of implementation. Now, the first point I want you to note is the key gap. So only looking at laws and policies is missing half of the story. Maybe it's missing most of the story of the reality of beneficiaries of international protection. And of course, we don't see that from our position as policymakers, as researchers, as people who've not had to flee our own country. It is critical that we continue to improve our information on the implementation of the Common European Asylum, including refugee integration, and that we continue to use all of the funds and cooperative structures possible to improve implementation. A second, more positive point you might see here is that there is positive change over time. From 2017 to 2019, we have a 7-point increase overall in the state of implementation of refugee integration policies across Europe. Implementation is still a relative area of weakness, despite these improvements. But I think the key takeaway is that improving implementation takes a lot of work. but change does slowly happen over time, and coordination structures and funding is really key to get local authorities and local NGOs to start implementing this change, because these are often the key actors of change. And a last missing point that was really well identified in our V4 report for NIEM that I encourage you all to read is building bridges as a main weakness in our integration policies. We at the Migration Policy Group, through the European website on integration, started monitoring all of the excellent voluntary initiatives and citizens' initiatives that developed in 2015 and 16, and that we found all across Europe, including here in the V4, where we saw excellent initiatives by students, by local authorities, to offer any help that they can. So despite this great desire by our own citizens to volunteer and to donate, unfortunately, our policies haven't really changed their way of working, meaning that our policies haven't done enough to really integrate volunteers and local citizens and local communities as part of the solution, because our policies cannot provide all of the solutions for refugee integration. Refugees need networks, they need mentors, they need neighbors who believe and support them. So as part of this, one of the main areas that I see emerging in our exchanges on integration policy is really how to improve communication. Communication, in my opinion, is something that's relatively poorly understood by policymakers on migration, who believe that the public is generally hostile. It is something that is also a weakness of many NGOs who don't have a strong public communications profile or independent communications policies and staff. And it's something also that migrants themselves strongly need to create their own organizations, to get the proper information, to fight fake news. Good communication is essential. So this is a new area that requires additional development. And as was pointed out in the V4 report, public opinion has become quite hostile in this region. But greater comparative research done by the Migration Policy Group, using the very same Eurobarometer study identified in the V4, finds that across Europe, public opinion is actually relatively positive and relatively stable. What does happen is that public opinion is very malleable. So who is a migrant, who is a refugee can very easily be defined in the public debate, particularly for people who are not very aware of this issue. And the V4 report really properly identified that people living, particularly in this region, have lacked access to good information on migration and refugees, which has made it very easy for populist politicians and populist media to redefine who a refugee is, to sustain a very negative debate about refugees, in order to really realign the politics of many conservative voters in this region, who now might have the wrong idea, really, of who a refugee is and not get the full information on all of the integration progress that they are making. So it is really key, I think, for us to consider in the future how we can continue to develop our practices and eventually our policies on building bridges. So with that, I invite you to discover everything that NIEM has to offer in all of these key areas of integration. And now I'll pass the floor to my colleague, Alexander Wolfhart, who will give you a sneak peek.
Thanks. I just follow up on where Thomas stopped. I will briefly show you which countries are involved in our research, where we stand in this endeavor, how we get to our results, how we can depict comparisons, and show a few results to make it a little bit more tangible. First of all, 16 countries are involved in NIEM. This is not the entire NU, it's not all member states, but it is a really good sample. We have got big countries and small countries, Spain and France on the one side, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia on the other side. We have got major destination countries of recent arrivals. We have got Sweden, we have got the Netherlands. We have typical arrival countries in the south of Europe. We got Italy and Greece. And then there is a number of East Central European countries involved, including the Visegrad countries, Poland, Czechia, and Hungary. Slovakia is affiliated with NIEM through the V4 NIEM project. So it's a really good sample, and what we learn in these countries really tells us something about refugee integration across the entire EU. NIEM is a 5-year multi-annual project. It foresees 1 baseline research and 2 rounds of policy evaluation and progress monitoring. We just launched earlier this year the baseline report, which is based on data from 2017, referring to recognized refugees and subsidiary protection, the 2 major protection groups. And also launched and published already all the national NIEM reports, where our partners focus on the challenges and needs of their countries. And also there is the V4 NIEM Visegrad countries national reports. All these publications are available and can be downloaded from our website for Integration EU. Now, what brings us together today are the results, as Thomas said, of the first evaluation. This research really compares the baseline with the current data from 2019. We plan to extend our analysis to other groups, persons under humanitarian protection, resettled refugees as well. What we present today are the first results based on 13 countries. The report is forthcoming early next year. Also, the national evaluation reports will be published early next year. Now, before you heard about this ambition of NIEM to become a comprehensive overall index of refugee integration in Europe. And what we can really say now after 2 rounds of research is that a real comparison, a real comparative approach can only be done or implemented in these 3 steps of the legal framework, policy framework, and implementation collaboration. Thomas already mentioned it. We have enormous data gaps in many countries. We don't know about budgets, what countries actually are investing in refugee integration. We lack statistical data, administrative data. We are mostly blind on outcome data, on how refugees actually fare and do and succeed. This exists for some countries, but for other countries, we really still lack it. So this is the task for the future, for future evaluations, to fill these data gaps. However, what we do and can do is assessing these 3 steps. What we do is we score on a scale from 0 to 100 each of these indicators. There are about 100 indicators where we can do this in these 3 steps already. And then we aggregate them along the dimensions and along these 3 steps. And this is then how it looks. Just as an example, for one country, this is France. So you see, we really get a sort of profile of the integration framework in place in one country. We can also differentiate among the different protection groups here in the legal step for recognized refugees and subsidiary protection. And then, of course, we can compare across countries within the different steps. And these are the 3 Visegrad countries, Czechia, Hungary, and Poland in the legal step. And what you can see here is actually that these results are quite similar, which is, of course, also reflecting the common European legal framework. And things become really interesting if you turn now to the policy step, where you already see quite a lot of differences between the three countries. Generally, the Czech Republic does best compared to Hungary and Poland. If you look, for example, on the housing dimension, the first line here, we have a range of scores from 17 only in Hungary to about 30 in Poland and 75 in the Czech Republic. If you just look at language learning, the second last line, it even ranges from 0 to 100. So this is the range of different results we see within the Visegrad countries. If we look now at the implementation and collaboration step, this becomes even more pronounced. And it really seems that this is the biggest challenge for refugee integration policies in the Visegrad countries. So we will have more on that in our thematic sessions after the break. We will split into 3 parallel groups. Each will cluster a number of dimensions. We will present more comparative results. We have partners here from more than 10 countries. They will present good practices, key challenges. We really want to show in these workshops how NIEM works in practice as a tool to identify good practices, facilitate knowledge transfer, and to identify needs and gaps to feed into national advocacy. 3 sessions. The first one on active citizenship. This will be a very interesting one, bringing together the dimensions in the legal integration field, like residency and citizenship, with the dimension building bridges, which is about participation, involvement of beneficiaries in civic activities, consultation processes. This will be chaired by our MPG colleague Carmine Conte, sitting over there. This will take place in room E, which is on the ground floor, and we will have country inputs from Hungary, Lithuania, Romania, and Sweden. The second thematic session will be on mainstreaming, combining the mainstreaming dimension with areas where this notion is of particular importance: health, housing, and social security. It also will be on the ground floor in the Nordic room. I will chair it. And we will have country inputs from Italy, Poland, Spain, if our colleague arrives on time, France. And the third meeting workshop will be on skills, bringing together employment, vocational training, education, language learning, and social orientation. This will take place here. Thomas will chair it. And we will have country inputs from Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, France, Greece, and the Netherlands, which is a change to what you can see here. But now we have a break.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I just want to repeat that now we have 3 parallel sessions. One will be here, chaired by Thomas, and 2 others will be on the ground floor. So near the reception, on the, well, it depends on from which part you're looking, but near the lift. And our colleagues from Menadec will guide you there. There is also information about it at the reception here. And now I just want to kindly invite you to the coffee break, and also our promotional materials arrived finally after 2 hours of delay, and feel free to, thank you, and feel free also to take folders with NIEM's notes, pens, and other useful materials. Thank you very much.
Can greet among us a very, very distinguished panel of experts on refugee integration. And for the upcoming 90 minutes, we will have a conversation on the very same topic we have been discussing throughout the day, but probably from a slightly different perspective and point of view, because among us we will have people who are actually applying and practicing refugee protection and more precisely refugee integration from various angles. First, I would like to greet Ms. Aidan Özus, member of the German Bundestag, former federal government commissioner for migration, refugees and integration from Germany. We also have among us Ms. Enikő Csontos, deputy head for the European Commission representation in Hungary, and also head of the political and economic analysis department. And then we have among us Mr. Jon Hoseter, deputy head of the Central European Mission of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And then Tamim Nashed, intercultural expert and the former policy officer of refugee integration at the European Council for Refugees and Exiles, ECRE, you may know in that name. And last but not least, Mr. Hazem Abu Younes, a study consultant and project leader at the Ibn Rushd Study Association from Sweden. So as you see, it is a very diverse and very wide range of experts from various layers and fields of refugee integration. And the plan is that in the beginning of the session, we will have a more coordinated conversation. And then in the second half, we will open up the discussion, and we very much count on your input and your involvement, not only as an audience, but also as active participants. So there will be time to ask questions, make remarks, and enter into dialogue with each other. Nevertheless, the time is short, and also we are quite a few people around this table. So I ask everybody, audience and panelists alike, to keep the conversation focused and precise and even short to the possible extent. First, we thought to have a very quick introductory round, and each and every participant could say a little bit about the angle and the background from which he or she contributes to this discussion. And as such, first I addressed Jon from the UNHCR as probably that's the broadest level of administrative systems, that as a representative of this United Nations Refugee Agency, what is your position on local integration, and especially in a context of solving the problems of refugees?
Thank you, Andras, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to time myself so we stick to your brief. Okay, big picture question. So let me take us back a little bit to the opening this morning, where Montserrat also spoke a little bit about the international legal framework. I think you all know that within the international legal refugee law framework, we traditionally speak about three solutions. And if you ask refugees around the world, the first response, the most desired solution, is often mentioned as voluntary repatriation, going home. We also know, of course, that that is often an elusive solution. It is not, in today's world, common that in the short and medium term, refugees are able to return home. We also know that the resettlement solution, resettlement to a third country, is for a chosen few around the world. So we end up with what was also said this morning or this afternoon by several speakers. Integration is the solution for the majority of the world's refugees. That needs to be acknowledged by governments and all actors, and it needs to be taken into account when we shape our response to the world's refugee problem. We can come back to what that means. One reason why this is often a difficult task, and here I'm also bringing in my own perspective on it, is that interestingly one needs to also recognize that there is no right to integration as such. There is no formal, firm legal right to integrate. So if you look at the Refugee Convention, it does not, for instance, require governments to integrate refugees. It has elements of integration in it, but it's rather soft and meek in its language. So it's interesting to read it. Another place that you can see this is in the Global Compact on Refugees. Many of you will know the Global Compact as a new effort to strengthen solidarity with refugee responses around the world. And the language there is also very much about governments electing to integrate or to allow integration for refugees. I'm highlighting this point because I think it is part of the challenge we're up against. The Refugee Convention does, however, catalog a number of rights that are essential for refugees to achieve integration. And in that sense, we do know quite well. We have quite a good definition of what we want to achieve, what it means for someone to integrate in a society. We have all those multifaceted elements quite clear. We have perhaps less clarity about how will we achieve that. In today's thematic sessions, you have all, or most of you, been discussing different ways that this is being addressed in this region. In different thematic areas, you've talked about best practices and activities, but you also talked a lot about problems and remaining gaps. And from UNHCR, I want to just flag a couple of key perspectives that very much preoccupy us and that is a focus for our engagement on these issues at the moment. And again, I will draw a little bit on some of the points that were mentioned earlier today. Number one, legal and policy frameworks are essential, but they are not sufficient to make integration happen. And I think we heard this throughout the day. For local integration to be viable and sustainable, the law and policy has to be put into action, has to be implemented. There has to be cooperation to do that. There has to be, in short, genuine engagement. There has to be real investment, and that includes at the community grassroots level. Unfortunately, my time is almost up, but let me finish. Unfortunately, this is not happening much in our region, and we saw that on the slides before the group work, that especially on the implementation and the cooperation, we're not doing very well. Some governments instead, in fact, create obstacles and create hindrances to creation of cohesive communities and inclusive societies. So that is the first point I wanted to make. The second, and don't worry, it's my last, refugees and host communities need to be active participants in shaping policies, in addressing gaps, in pursuing opportunities, and in evaluating outcomes. The success stories from our region, and there are actually quite a few, they often show this commonality. Integration has to be allowing people to use their skills, to make use of their resources, to become active members of society, to contribute to the societies that they are becoming part of. This requires commitment from host communities and also from refugees. In the end of the day, integration is about people working with people. And this perspective needs to be there at the bottom of everything we do. I'll leave it with that.
Thank you so much. And now we narrow our focus a little bit and we talk about a regional protection system, which is the European Union. And I ask Annika, as a representative of the European Commission, to tell us a few words about the Commission's work in facilitating the local integration in member states or even in more or smaller communities.
Thank you very much. So first of all, the starting point from the EU perspective is that the legal competence of the European Union is limited in the field of integration to providing support and incentives to member states. So there can be, we cannot talk of harmonization of legislation in this area. That's very important. So what the EU can do is to promote exchange and mutual learning and supporting the monitoring of integration outcomes across the EU, and very importantly to provide EU funding through various programs. The basic, the other starting point is that in the past years the Commission has significantly increased support to Member States and also all relevant stakeholders in the field of integration through funding, policy coordination, and, as I said, promoting exchanges of experiences and practices. There was a very important policy document that was adopted in 2016, which I'm sure you are all aware of, is the action plan on the integration of third country nationals. So throughout the last years, this was the most important policy framework document that initiated and incorporated a lot of programs and coordination work across many pillars. Education, labor market integration, skills, language learning, but also coordination and better putting in place better frameworks for experts from the various member states to come together and exchange. And of course, the action plan is part of a bigger policy document which is called the European Agenda on Migration, which was adopted in a year earlier, so in 2015, which also has as one of the 4 pillars legal migration and integration. So obviously these issues are very important for the Commission and for the whole of the EU. Now, what I can say for the future, you probably know that we are in a very interesting period of time because there is an outgoing commission and a new commission which is going to settle in somewhere probably beginning of December. We don't know exactly yet when. And it's clear that for the future commission, there will be also a strong focus on integration. And as the you probably heard about a much debated priority of the next commission, which is called Protecting Our European Way of Life. And it will be a Greek commissioner, Margaritis Skinas, who will be mainly in charge of putting in place many policies which are covered by this Protecting Our European Way of Life priority. But within this, as I said, there will be a strong focus on integration. And as Mr. Skinas formulated it in his hearing before the European Parliament, he pretty much will focus on building a society that is fair and that is more inclusive, because we must ensure that our communities are cohesive and close-knit. And he believes that integration is both an opportunity and also a necessity for Europe. And I cannot give you any details at this point in time, but we are pretty sure that the Commission will present soon a new strategy, a new action plan. We don't know yet how exactly it will be called, and of course it will build on the achievements and the experiences of the current one. And it will aim at trying to be more inclusive and with a horizontal approach, again encompassing the different areas. And another very important, and then of course you probably know that under the current acquis, I mean, I said we couldn't do a harmonization of legislation, but there was of course some parts of the existing legislation that was relevant for the issue of integration, such as the Qualifications Directive, the Receptions Directive, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And you probably know that the Commission has presented a reform of the Asylum law, which is still in discussion, so there was no agreement, and this concerns the reception, the proposal to replace the Reception Conditions Directive and also the Qualifications Directive, which are also stuck in the discussions, in the negotiations. So as the President-elect von der Leyen announced, the Commission will present a new pact on asylum and migration. And of course, we will have to also decide what to do with the proposals that are pending. And finally, but it's very important, there are new ideas in the funding. You probably heard about the next multi-annual financial framework, And there is a new approach now, so the short-term integration measures will be covered by the Asylum and Migration Fund, whereas with more money, and the longer-term integration measures will be covered by the European Social Fund plus many other regional funds, again with more funding. So more funding will be available in the next period. And involving the local stakeholders, civil society, so the next financial framework gives a lot more emphasis on better coordination at national level, at EU level, involving in the programming the stakeholders at the local level, because you are the ones that actually do the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Good news. And now we can turn our attention to the ones who actually do the work and talk about the local level and the level of a member state, and a very important one. So I'm asking you, Aidan. You were responsible for integration in the times when actually Germany received many newcomers, and we are very curious about hearing about both the problems and challenges you had to tackle, and also the successes and also the ways you managed to sort it out.
Thank you so much. That I can start in German. Maybe then I try. Can I use this also? Great. Thank you.
You see, we were serious when we announced the German.
It's not too many. No, we stopped it already.
Yeah, we did. Don't worry, don't worry. We are not counting the time out.
It's good, huh? A little bit. Yeah.
It's a good icebreaker, isn't it?
Coffee, maybe.
So. Okay. Yeah.
It should be okay.
Does it work? Did it work?
No, not
Not yet? Okay. Does the translation work? Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, ich fange jetzt einfach an. Vielen Dank. Trotzdem nochmal dafür, aber es ist etwas kompliziert, finde ich, und deswegen versuche ich es jetzt relativ schnell.
I would like to thank you again for inviting me, but I think that it's very difficult to summarize everything quickly. That's why I want to switch to the German, because I can speak faster. In Germany, there have always been immigrants, especially after the Second World War. We can say that's when we really started the wave. So in terms of labor, we can say that there are a lot of laborers that came who were foreigners, but they are not the same as refugees. So, and also there can be a lot of requirements. If somebody wants to work here in our country, you must do this or that, because that's the way you can find work. But obviously we cannot set out the same conditions for refugees, since they have a reason to escape and seek refuge. Of course, not everybody can fall into the category of refugees, because there are economic migrants who are poor, and that's why they want to leave their countries. But poverty itself is not enough to obtain the refugee status. Therefore, in Germany, we always examine who has a chance to immigrate. I'm a second-generation immigrant. I was born in Hamburg, and I grew up there. But despite this fact, in the statistics, I'm still included as a migrant. It's interesting that as a second generation, I'm still a migrant in the statistics. In 2015 and 16, as all of us know, there was a huge wave that arrived in Europe, and we had to accommodate a lot of people very fast. We had to care for them and provide services for them. A lot of them were, of course, ill, and we had to very quickly consider what we needed for this on the central and local level. But obviously, we need the society for this, because without the society, you cannot get anywhere in Germany. So if everybody in the society had said they didn't want that, we couldn't have done anything. But we found ourselves in a situation at that time where a lot of people in the society said, yes, we don't want this. Of course, nobody wants a lot of refugees to arrive in their countries, but they were there, they have arrived, so let's do something. So a lot of people said they didn't want it, but the situation is here, so we have to do our best. And I think that in terms of integration, this is very important. Of course, the various provinces can decide who is eligible for the status. And I, of course, immediately realized that we would need a lot of funding for this, and we needed to find the sources for this funding as soon as possible to help the people. So it's very important that my colleagues have worked very hard in order to help people and to realize what people needed. And that was not always an easy job. And for example, from the German parliament, we also received money to support NGOs and volunteers, because this task exceeded our competencies, and we could share our experiences, and we could support them also later on in their work. And of course, the legal framework had to be changed as well, so we could draw a lot of conclusions from the Bosnian War, and we really paid attention to the fact that people shouldn't only be sitting and waiting for procedures to be over, but they could immediately start learning German until they could find out if they can stay. We wanted to distribute them also around the country, so there were a lot of practical things and knowledge in our hands that we could use. For example, it was very important that they could start work as soon as possible, and it was also a topic of a long debate whether we should allow them to work. And I know that there are countries where the probability of refugee status, where people are more probable to stay in the country after receiving the refugee status, and there are countries where it's less probable. And Germany is, of course, one of the countries where people want to stay. So we had to elaborate documents and legal regulations that targeted specifically young people whose case was in progress. And I think that was very special in Germany, because a lot of countries say that once your status has been granted, then you can start studying only. In Germany, they could immediately start studying or going to vocational schools. And it was really helpful, because that's how we managed to train a lot of skilled laborers and workers. I'm running out of time, but I wanted to say a lot of other things, but I will say that later then.
Into your work and the challenges you have to face with, and I'm sure we can get back to one of the other elements later on. But you mentioned several times the local communities and also the refugees and migrants themselves. And on this stake, I will ask Hazem, as an NGO worker and a civil society activist, to tell us a few words about the role of refugee and migrant community organizations in fostering local integration. Hazem.
Thank you, Andras, and thank you to having me here. It's my pleasure, actually, to be a good practice and example how the NGO and how the refugees themselves after I arrived to Sweden just like 6 years ago. My father's Palestinian, my mom, she's a Syrian, and this is the first time in my life to become a citizenship, a Swedish citizenship. And interacting with the society in building the integration, and we in the organization that I represent, Ibn Rushd Studieverbund, from the name is like the European Muslims philosopher from Andalusia, Averroes. So this organization is somehow trying to work to be a bridge between the government, the system, and the local community. And itself, when the idea started like 10 years ago with these organizations, is to have the maximum efforts from the individuals, the newcomer themselves, to be active in the society. And it's one of 10 organizations in Sweden. Sweden, it's named like the country of association. We have around 200,000 associations. The smallest is Ibn Rushd with the Islamic background. We have the biggest minority in Sweden now. They are Muslim backgrounds, 10% we are talking about. The second biggest language is the Arabic. So how we could integrate these people to the system? So it's through this small NGOs, or we call it in Swedish Förening, association, and through like learning the language in their way, like the way that's in typical school. It's very good, but sometimes it's very difficult to the old people arrive to Sweden, like with many challenges from their countries until they arrive. So it's sometimes become easy for them to study it in the way they know, and the way it's become easy for them. And actually, as I mentioned, it's two-way integration. We believe, like we know that how much the governments, they support the way of learning the language, learning the cultural, which is very important. But what's about also from the hosting community, hosting country, to learn the refugees themselves, culturals, and we have a good example. One of the biggest activities we have it now in Malmö, it's the Eid festival. Eid is a traditional, religious, traditional celebrating. We have it after Bayram, Ramadan. So one of the biggest gardening in the city, we have 15,000 participating, and it's become the fourth biggest events in the city. So, and having people in this kind of activities, it's make them feeling they are home. This is new home they are in, to be active, to go to work, to go and study, to accept other people. And really, like, with in cooperation with other minorities, like in Sweden we have the Romers, we have the Jews. Cooperating such activities, it's give the people more understandings to what's this community mean by, for example, homosexual. It's a big question to the newcomer. So through this kind of organization, we could have many projects to make these people understand and accept each others. And we believe with the Folkbildningsrådet, which is the high organization of public education in Sweden, we believe that to have a real good interaction, a real good, the time is off, a real good integration, it should be from both sides, not only one side. And that's what we are working for and looking for to have it in Sweden. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now the last comment should come from Tamim, and actually your task is a little bit difficult because we need to get back to the level of European policies. Because I mean, ultimately, NIEM is about influencing and shaping European integration policies, and we heard about different layers, and I also know that you worked for several years with refugee community organizations. And the question is, I mean, how do you see these organizations and their work and the knowledge can contribute to shaping policies on a European level?
Good afternoon. I think you made it for me difficult now because I was relaxed, but now I'm a bit stressed. No, I have to go back to my plan. I will actually, first of all, build on what Hazem last said. He said it's a two-way process. So what if we are talking at local level or European level, we need to think of policies from both perspectives. And I don't want to explain what does that mean because I assume you are all aware of this two-way process. But when we talk about refugee-led organizations or community organizations, the first question which comes to my mind is, do we need refugee-led organization in our work? And if yes, then why? So what is the added value of having a refugee-led organization in shaping our policies? There are heaps of researches and studies about the importance of refugee-led organizations, participation, how can we involve them, engage them in the policy making, etc. But the thing, when we talk at in EU level, or even at local level, are we really involving them in the right way, or is it just kind of decoration, manipulation, or just in better scenarios, is it kind of, I think the word in English is tokenism. It's like just to maybe have refugees on a panel and let them talk and then give some interviews to the media, expect what they are going to say and finish. So we need to ask ourselves, are we looking at refugee communities at this way or not? I'm happy, actually, this is the first time I'm representing myself. I'm not representing any organization today. So I'm like, I can say what I want. So if to policymakers or at EU level, if they answer and they say, yes, we really want refugee communities to be involved in shaping integration policies, then I go back now to the refugee perspective or the refugee-led organization perspective, and then ask the question also, what is the added value if I am representing a refugee-led organization? What is the added value? Or I think we need to avoid repetitions, because if there are some researchers and studies from refugee-led organizations, but they are at the end putting the same recommendations which are already on the table. So, and the question is then, is it an added value? Or it's just because it came from a refugee-led organization, because we heard it from refugees, so they get more applause. So I don't like this approach, in my opinion. This is my personal experience. So we need, I think, there is a responsibility from refugees as well to know what are they fighting for? What are the main obstacles for the integration of refugees, apart from these legal frameworks, access to labor market, citizenship, etc. What are we fighting for? So this is a question. And how much time do I need? 2 minutes more? Yeah, good. So now I go back to policymakers, if they are willing to share responsibility and share power with refugee-led organization or refugee community organization, then we need really to work on that and empower them, fund them, don't like treat them equally as any other organization, not as that we know more than you. So it's about empowerment and training. And I will be now very precise also. I think the added value, back to the question, what could be the added value of having refugee-led organizations? Refugees need to be honest. They need to talk about taboos. They need to talk about topics which are hidden. I originally come from Syria, so I know what I'm telling you. I'm not like just throwing out some words. There are hidden topics. In the morning, or in the we held the quality of integration projects. If you check with refugees, or we call them beneficiaries, are they happy with what are they getting or receiving, or not? So this is the thing, there are hidden topics which we are not really addressing, even refugees themselves, because they talk among themselves and they say, yeah, yeah, it's okay, we are attending this course, but it's blah, blah, blah at the end. So yeah, honestly, so we really have to be honest and to really, it's time now to look for quality, not quantity. Otherwise, the results are fake. This is my personal opinion. And last point, refugees, I was one of them. We come from developing countries. I worked in NGO field, also in Syria, in Aleppo. There were heaps of topics which we were working on as civil society, and now we are skipping all these topics and jumping to the integration. So there are already, we need to go back a little bit, understand what is behind, work on them, and then go upwards. Maybe we will have the chance to talk more later. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamim. And actually, from now on, there is no more order in jumping in and contributing to the issues and questions. The idea is to go on with a few more questions and having the panelists responding on them, and then we eventually will open up the discussion. And Tamim, you had a question in your presentation asking what we are fighting for, and this is exactly the question I want to ask you. So, what are you fighting for? What you see as the biggest challenge or the biggest obstacle to overcome, and how do you go about it? I mean, anyone who feels.
Yeah, I can actually. We are fighting for a better society for everyone, an equal society, and really, like, the populace now in Europe in the a very high level, and we ask, for example, from our side and the local organization in Sweden, to have, like, we need a law, and the good things that we do that campaign, and we have with us, like, the Jews, we have with us the Christianity, we have with us the Romers, and we need something like forbidding this hurting people and hurting refugees.
Thank you. And Aidan, you wanted to?
German? Yeah, sure. Now, one more time. Das ist jetzt auch etwas sensibel.
More of a sensitive issue, so I would rather do it in Germany. I had the experience that if many people come to the country, arrive to the country, then the right side of society gets stronger. You can actually foresee it. In 2014, I said that the coming years would be very difficult in Germany, because I was referring only to Germany, but indeed it has become very difficult. And for me, this meant that you always have to consider that in terms of minorities, migrants, refugees, you have to consider what the right side and what all of society wants. You cannot just order something in this respect. So I believe that it is very important to be represented in order to have people, which is a problem in case of refugees. You can't expect from refugees that they come to a country and that they are immediately strong and powerful and protect their rights, but I need to be represented. I need people who represent, actually. And on the other side, I also need this kind of balance. And what is missing, and where I believe that we need to improve in Europe, is that in each and every country, we should have a person only responsible for this kind of immigration policies, any kind of immigration. So people responsible for only this and only issue, and who exchange ideas and experiences, who exchange similarities and differences from country to country, because some countries react differently to others. Some societies are again different. And how can we support and help each other mutually? And how can we invite one colleague to another country in order to exchange ideas and experience? So I have been fighting for this quite a lot. Nobody actually listened to me, but this was a very difficult item to affirm, to state. We should not just declare that these countries are difficult ones and those make everything more easily, but we should somehow get closer to one another in Europe to exchange ideas to get it better.
Thank you. I think from the European perspective, from the Commission's perspective, as I already said, we are fighting for, if I may put it like this, for a more inclusive and fair society. That's clearly the aim of the next Commission. And the other points I want to make is to have a discussion on these issues. It's very important. I think also to involve the citizens, but also the stakeholders. I don't know if you are aware, but there was a Eurobarometer survey on integration recently, 2 years ago. And actually it was pretty clear that the majority of the European citizens felt that Europe has to invest more in integration, and that the majority also felt that this was a two-way process. So I think this is what we need to help and to foster. I believe that when we talk about protecting the European way of life, it means exactly this inclusive and helping way of life. So it's not at all the way it was often interpreted, that we want to exclude anybody. On the contrary, to preserve the welcoming society, but at the same time to work on giving equal chances and opportunities to everybody.
From my side, I like to normally speak about things we fight for, but there is really one thing that we are trying to fight against, and not so successfully. And that is the way that asylum and migration issues have become so extremely politicized. I think it is something we're up against, which has an enormous destructive force on the way that we don't have opportunity to engage in developing sound, evidence-based policies, because the issues we're discussing are not about finding solutions. They are about political considerations in the countries where we are working, and we need to fight against this. We need to find a way to not let that dominate how we work. We all know that politicians in many countries are knowingly promoting division using an us and them rhetoric, and it catches us in a cycle of arguments that we have not been able to get out of. This is destroying the basis for inclusive societies, for success on integration. This is something we have to continue fighting against.
Thank you. And I think you can. No. But because I'm also encouraging you to kind of enter into dialogue with each other. So I mean, it's absolutely all right. And I try to be more challenging. And Annika brought up the results of the Eurobarometer, saying that people apparently want more Europe in certain areas, migration, asylum included. Nevertheless, we keep hearing that this is something which is not exactly the business of the European Union or the European Commission to tell member states how to go about their own societies, their own communities, the people they take in or the people they reject. And actually, my question here is, I mean, what do you see or think the ideal role for a supranational unit such as the European Union in this delicate issue? Aidan also mentioned the discontent of the local communities. So I guess you need to balance a lot in this respect. So how do you see an ideal and effective European policy that helps the integration of refugees, both the policies and also not only integration of refugees, but integration of local communities where refugees live?
I think, we use the terms integration and inclusion. So how do we head towards inclusion? And the colleagues already said maybe we're fighting against the political polarization, or we are encouraging inclusive societies. Now, talking from this, using the policy language, I think as long as integration stays as member state competence and not EU competence, then, to be honest, in my personal opinion, we are a bit wasting time. We are repeating, we are doing the same things, maybe. Sure, there are always new things, but this is my general view of the things. But how could the EU maybe encourage inclusive societies? Maybe we should think of on the long term. We should teach diversity, make it part of our education system, maybe teach those children what does diversity mean, so that they grow up in a way they don't care if someone is a refugee or a migrant or a European or whatever. So I think this could be worked on from a EU perspective, maybe to encourage member states to have inclusive societies. This is, maybe it's not very realistic, I don't know, but this is like my wish. Yeah, so it's like the way, how can we encourage inclusive societies, how to create these equal opportunities if people don't understand what does diversity mean. And what is the added value of it.
Thank you, and also thanks for the question.
I want to add a thing, because I did study also on migration topics in Sweden, and I like the example of Singapore, and it's become like a discussion in Sweden, because we have become more and more problem of the area where migrants live together, and it's not be well integrated with the local community. And how to have the Singapore example, like to have percentage in such areas, like a lot. For example, we have now in Sweden a lot of projects, but still somewhere it's not that good as we wish. And I trust on the education from the low level, from the basic level, because we have this study system also in Sweden through the public education and through the normal education, like kids, they can make difference. Like kids, they from the equality, from the diversity they have from the kindergartens, they can make difference. And I think it's a very good investment to the governments and EU. Yep.
Ja, ich würde das gerne ergänzen, weil das ist ein ganz, ganz wichtiger Punkt in meinen Augen, weil ich glaube tatsächlich, dass
the community and society that otherwise would be inclusive and accepting and ready to accept others, the moment when refugees arrive into this society, this society has a completely different approach. In Germany, our experience was that in the regions where there were enough crashes, nursery schools, kindergartens, and schools were able to receive new children, it was much easier to integrate these children. And on many occasions, we also hear other examples, other news on the news channels, but the truth is that research shows that the regions that are economically really successful are the regions where there are a lot of migrants, as opposed to the regions where there are not enough migrants. And we followed up on this, and actually we found that the higher the receptiveness towards migrants is, the higher the number of migrants and refugees is. However, acceptance is only on a high level if the residents feel that migrants and refugees are evenly distributed and they are not concentrated to one city. And we have proved this because we have done this assessment, and in Berlin, in the ministry, we always see this debate that the lands say that they want more money because they were delegated more tasks, and the federal level could resolve this, and we gave the money to accommodate the migrants and to care for them. And I think that if the community feels that the migrants and refugees are evenly distributed, then people say, okay, this works well, and we can undertake this. And so in these cases, the concerns are lower towards migrants and refugees.
I wanted to pick up on that point and broaden it a bit, because speaking about Germany in terms of what people would like to find in terms of cities or regions or Länder, I think you can extend it to the EU more broadly, and you can even look at it from the perspective of what do people know before they come to Europe. I think it's quite evident that we have a problem with making sure that there is genuine information, real information among people on the move in terms of what are the real opportunities when you approach and when you enter the European Union. It's clear that many refugees have no choice but to avail themselves for smugglers in order to enter the EU. In fact, we've almost outsourced the arrival for refugees to smugglers because there's no way you can arrive in this continent legally. One effect of this is that there is a whole industry, an illegal network industry, that feeds an expectation to people before they even arrive in Europe about what they should find and where they should find it. I think we have a major challenge in trying to break that distorted, often, perception about what it means to arrive in Europe and where and how it is possible to make a life. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we have a description from Germany and Sweden on this panel, because those are two countries where we have a lot of experience now in terms of what it means to arrive and what it means to try and integrate. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's fantastic that we have good experiences, but I think we should find a way to look for those experiences to be more available also in the rest of Europe. And it is not only a question of the frameworks and the systems and the support, it is also a question of what do people know about what's available elsewhere, and how can we build motivation for people to look for opportunities also in other countries.
Thank you. And Jon just mentioned good experiences, and I think this is the point where we can make the discussion a little bit more personal. I guess everybody is pretty curious about your own experiences in terms of successes and practices that work, and if you could share us anything you feel was a particularly good experience or a success in your work around integration, we would appreciate that very much.
Just little examples?
Little examples.
I can start. Like, well, I have a very good example, and it's back like to the point of the Sweden and the policy of the government to enhance the integration. I remember when I arrived to Sweden as a refugee, because I visited a lot Sweden before, and Germany and other countries, and all the time I say I will back to Damascus, to be back there, because where I live as a citizen, even I don't have the nationality. Me and my wife was very afraid, like for my kids to lose the mother language. I have triplets, and they was like when we arrived like 1 year and 8 months, and when we have this meeting with the school director and the staff, and or kindergarten actually, and she told us, like, in the law in Sweden, your kids have the right to learn the mother language. And we, are you sure? Like, they are not going like to forbid their mother language? No, they have the right. And really, it was like a very good experience for us to feel the citizenship, to feel how much it's make a big effort to Sweden. Like, we have a lot of studies with, for example, Malmö University have a great studies why with this an area in Malmö it's not well integrated, because the people there, they haven't got a good education, their kids haven't speak the language, even they don't speak the language, the Swedish language. So there is become a difficult communication, and we come to the segregation. So Swedes are invest more in teach language, mother language, because it gives Swedes like a multiple language which make the society better and better.
Sorry, I was a bit distracted. You need to so like good example, like from. Well, first, I appreciate, Andras, that you avoided introducing refugees or something. Yeah, because it feels different when it's a personal choice to talk about your personal experiences as good or bad examples. For me, this is very personal. I'm happy to share it with you. For me, it was, so I come from Syria, Aleppo. The long way of integration or inclusion, I don't know. The most important moment for me in the last 6-7 years was on the 28th of September last month, when I voted in Austria. So because I received the citizenship just a few months ago, the Austrian citizenship, and this was the first time I felt I'm really part of this country, because even at personal level, I mean, I didn't have the need to have Austrian. I have great Austrian friends. I'm very well, I think I was very well included, or how to say, I had my connections. Everything was fine, but you never feel strong unless you are also legally strong. So that's why I'm also today very glad to see that also NIEM research, they were talking about active citizenship, the legal framework of citizenship, because some people underestimate the importance of active citizenship. it's just one of the most important elements of successful, I think, integration, so that you just feel confident enough and you feel like, yes, now I can create a perspective for myself for the future, because I think everyone needs to have a perspective in his or her life. And once you deprive people from also having the ability to have perspective, then, I mean, we are destroying, future of life, I think. This is my opinion. So with this subsidiary protection, legal frameworks, 1-year residency, family reunification, how do you expect people to integrate or to feel included in the society without having a clear feeling of security, and then you can build on and have a perspective. So this is from my own experience.
Yeah, I add a personal one and one of my work. And I still didn't have any citizenship that time. It wasn't, you know, like in Germany, you didn't have citizenship, even when you were born there. And it was very important to become German. And if you look at it today, I mean, I'm a woman. My background is Turkish. I'm a Muslim. I have like all stigmata that you need to bring up right-wing people. And actually, I could feel this when I was a state minister. I was the perfect, person to blame, and it was a hard time also. But what was really a good experience was that, you know, once when I was really attacked in a very harsh way, people that I didn't even know, you know, I never met before on the streets or when I was just going to buy something, they came to me and said, we will not accept this. You know, we will not, we don't want this in our country. And that was really interesting because then we had elections. It was 2017. And I had like so many votes. No, what do you say? Votes, even from all other parties, you know, most of them from the Conservative Party, which was really interesting to see that people really, you know, up to a point you can criticize, of course, you know, you can say, I don't like this or I don't accept this or whatever, but when you're attacked in such a way, then people say, okay, there's a line, and this is actually what we need. And maybe one good example that I had in my work is, I remember that for me the most important thing was sports, actually, and my sports club. So I convinced the soccer federation, the German Soccer Federation, whatever, Deutscher Fußballbund, to do a project with me. So they went to all the soccer clubs in all Germany and said, if you don't do something for refugees, we will put you in a network and we will give you some support. And we expected maybe 300, 400 in a year. And it was like 1,400 in 1 year that joined this project. And I think this is one of the most important things because, you know, when you're all these young boys, you know, they look at all those, I mean, German soccer, it's like so important for us. So they look at them and they want to be like them, and then they forget about their background, their whatever, their history, their family for a certain time, and then they have new friends there. And this really worked out, and I'm quite proud that we could manage this in a way, and I hope it will go on, of course.
Yes, I was hoping you forget about me. Because I'm not very comfortable, actually, I would say, on personal terms, talk about achievements and successes, especially not on integration. Because I think, and I really hope that our main successes and my own successes working for UNHCR on this topic are ahead of me and not behind me. But obviously I have experiences that have been good, and maybe without mentioning a specific one, I think I am encouraged by how UNHCR has changed in the 20 years I worked with UNHCR. And I want to pick up the wording of tokenism and working with refugees, because I think it's a fair concern to raise when I look back at all of the conferences and all of the roundtables and all of the panels I've taken part in those years, where yes, often there is a refugee representation, but too frequently it has been, in a way, maybe cynically looking at it to tick a box. And I genuinely think that we have moved away from that. I genuinely think, as an organization, UNHCR has understood and taken on this challenge and really genuinely is working to bring the refugees to the center of our response, of our advocacy, and of our facilitation of the integration work. I think there's one example of this. We're working here in Hungary with partners on this bridge building of bringing refugees and the support organizations closer together. So I do want to say that I think I'm very encouraged by being on the right track on this, feeling that genuinely we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much. And actually, we have less than half an hour to go, and I feel that this is the time when we can open up the conversation and the discussion. So from now on, everybody in the room has the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists as individuals or a general question to the whole panel. So now I'm asking you as the audience, and my colleagues are helping with the mics. Please speak into the mics, because there is interpretation and it works only if you use the mic.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. I really like the example of the football project. I am Argentinian, so it touched my heart. By the football project, I really like that. And I have a very specific question for Tamim. Sorry. I like it that you brought the topic of refugees coming from developing countries, okay, which is obvious, but that you used to work there, that you have previous experience, and that there are certain hidden topics you mentioned that should be addressed, and I would like you to develop further on that, if it is possible. Okay, thank you.
I made it difficult for myself, I think. Yes, for example, just it comes to my mind first now. I mean, it's tricky here in Europe to talk about how to put it in the right context, to talk about negative things coming from refugees, because it could have a negative impact on the whole political context at local level. But in Syria, for example, I personally was working on projects trying to empower women, for example, to enter the labor market. But if I say it to policymakers in a very general way without details, they might think, okay, yeah, all women are weak, they all don't go to work, or they are not willing to work, which is also wrong. So it means, sure, comparing Syria to Austria, for example, where I live, there is a huge difference between equality between men and women. So empowering women, for example, in Aleppo is a big city, it's a huge city, there were areas where it was difficult to reach out to them. So this is one very easy example. Other things about, again, it's really tricky, yeah? So I hope you won't get it wrong. Also about religious topics, beliefs, because when politicians, maybe at EU level or in Austria, Austrian politicians, they talk about religion and they say Syrian or people from Afghanistan are not willing to abandon their beliefs, etc. then I would be nervous as someone from Syria, and I would not accept that from them. But maybe there is a line in the middle where we can come closer to each other and discuss the topic. So this is in my opinion. So to avoid generalizing also, that's why it's tricky. So I hope I made it clear.
Thank you. There's one question there, and then you're here.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Valeria Horvat. I'm a doctoral researcher, but I also work for Migrants Health Association. And my question is kind of synthesizing some of the things that you've mentioned, and I want to ask something very practical. So, for example, Make Help is a refugee-led organization, and you've also touched upon how for integration, a key point is to also empower the local community, the host community, and how to bridge between the two communities or two individuals, the people who are coming here and the people who are already here. And then there's also a question of financing if we're talking about NGOs who are doing the work. A lot of the AMIF funds actually exclude locals or nationals or EU citizens to take part in some of these integration trainings. So synthesizing all these things that you've mentioned, what do you suggest practically for any NGO to do if they want to organize an integration training where nationals and non-nationals can also attend? Hopefully there'll be more funding in the coming years, but also practically, how do you encourage, let's say, locals who are not, especially in a very politicized context that you've mentioned, to participate in such a training? How do you encourage that dialogue very practically? I mean, thank you.
Thank you. So, who's gonna?
Okay, aber das mache ich nochmal auf Deutsch, sorry. Also wir haben in Deutschland tatsächlich angefangen, Telefonnummern
to create telephone lines where people can register if they want to help, but much sooner people themselves, so even young students from my city, from Hamburg, they were students of economics who created a whole enterprise actually where they were collecting clothes and they got our fair halls, and thousands of people actually went to the hall because they were called to come and help. And the Senate of Hamburg actually supported this financially because it helped a lot and so many people participated. On the other hand, there are NGOs that have this kind of vast experience, and we try to bundle them up together. So it's not that one is carrying out one project and the other one something else, but we had different kinds of content. For instance, I had a project, I attempted to implement a project where women specifically are helped. Women who are single are helped. And any NGO that had experience in this respect could get together, and someone who has been living in Germany, who mastered German or some other language, or people from Afghanistan who spoke Farsi, and they make up a team. So there is a tutor and an interpreter with a psychotherapist, which is again a huge subject, how to provide psychotherapy to anybody who does not speak German. It is difficult via interpretation, but every now and then we try to bundle them together in order to enable financing as well, because in my opinion it would not work if we want to provide everything a little bit. Nobody would be content with that, not even an organization. So you have to be very focused, very targeted on different areas so that there is real exchange going on.
For raising it, because I think it's a very good illustration of how policy does not match some of these outcomes that we all agree on, that there needs to be bridge building, that there needs to be cohesion, that there needs to be engagement that brings people together. And I think the AMIF funding is, of course, a fantastic tool. It's quite unique in the world. I think that a region can draw on such resources for civil society, but then it's very unfortunate that some of these core goals don't fit in that policy package, where in fact the EU demands do not give any of this to even a single Hungarian, because then we will come and take away some of the money. So I don't have really the answer to it. I think we need to do a better job in advocating with the EU system on fixing this. Meanwhile, as you may know, we've been discussing with your team how we can maybe complement in a small way from UNHCR that part of the funding that would then give you a possibility to put together a comprehensive project. But I think it's a very good example of where policy is not well suited to what we want to achieve.
Thank you. Maybe the EU has a say on this.
I'm not sure I can answer that specific question of whether under the next MFF this particular problem will be addressed, but what I wanted to say is that indeed in the preparation of the new proposals, the Commission tried to listen to the various stakeholders when addressing who and how can apply for the funding. So what has been, in our view, improved in the next MFF, you probably know that the next fund, so the AMF, the Asylum and Migration Fund, will be under, together with other structural funds, under the common regulation. So from a procedural point of view, the common provisions regulation will be also relevant for the next AMF fund. And what is required now is, so there are several things that are now required. First of all, for ourselves, for the Commission, there is a stronger obligation to consult organizations representing partners across the EU on implementing the programs on a regular basis, so once a year at least. Plus, there is an obligation for the member states to, when they are preparing their own national programs, so it's not about the Asylum Fund only, but all the other structural funds that are under this common provision, the regulation, to actually associate integration stakeholders when they so public authorities, economic social partners, bodies representing civil society at national, regional, and local level, to involve them in the preparation, implementation, and the monitoring and evaluation of the national programs for the shared management funds. And in addition, there is also increased possibility for the member states to allocate funds to increase the capacity of civil society, so kind of technical assistance type of funds. And the co-financing is also changing when it comes to, so there can be a higher maximum contribution compared to the average. The average is 75% EU co-financing, but that's a lot more complicated than that, so I just stick to the, let's say, the poorest regions. And this can be a higher contribution for a defined list of actions that include integration measures implemented by local, regional authorities and civil society organizations. There can be a higher co-funding from the EU. So these are the things that we try to improve. I unfortunately cannot answer you on this very specific question, but I try to look for the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question to all members of the panel, because the representative of the Commission and the mentioned that just now you emphasize it will be given to long-term integration measures. So my question is, how can you consider the acquisition of citizenship? It's whether it's a gate to enter to integration, or it's only a second priority, so it's not so relevant and not so important. The question is very interesting because Tommy mentioned a very personal confession saying that to vote in a country, it's a very emblematic participation of active citizenship. But last week there was an election in Hungary, and that was some constituency in which the list of voters contained only foreign
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. So it was 2 questions in one go about the importance of citizenship and how to facilitate voting, actual voting, not only voting rights.
Just a short comment. I think, yeah, it's very important to be aware of our rights. I mean, as a citizen or anybody, or as a refugee or whatever, because for me it was striking 2 years ago when I was in Austria. I had a recognized refugee status. Politicians were just changing laws, affecting me. Although I was not directly affected because I was doing well, integrated in the labor market, etc. But I was just shocked, and at that time I felt how important it is to be part of this right, you know. So that's why we need not to underestimate this, how to facilitate it, how to develop it, how to make it realistic. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer. I mean.
And briefly again, I want to take the opportunity of that question just to flag that there is a separate article in the convention on citizenship, naturalization. And again, it illustrates how our tool here is a bit weaker than when it comes to asylum. The sentence is, the contracting state shall as far as possible facilitate the assimilation and naturalization of refugees. As far as possible. That's not very strong, hard law to build an advocacy campaign around. And I think that's part of the reason why we are where we are. States feel very empowered to themselves determine to what extent that should be facilitated. I think we heard earlier today about how the EU has committed to some extent to create pathways to citizenship, and that is extremely important. But I think also, for us, it's not just about looking into the letter of the convention or what's been committed. Isn't it also a simple case of what should also be in the interest not just of refugees, but also of the states? Is it in the interest of a state to have a population who doesn't have access to citizenship over time? Can that actually facilitate the goal of full and equal membership on society? Probably not. So I think we need to engage with states on that basis, that this is in everybody's interest. It is not just a question of what should be given or not. It's a question of what should be the best outcome, both for refugees and for states.
Yeah, maybe just to add, when I came in Hamburg Parliament, I was the very first woman, you know, who was ever there with a Turkish name, and it was so important for my own party, because we saw that in all our discussions, I had, especially with these topics, quite a different view, of course, on many things. And we found out how important it was for all of us. And as just Jon said, I think that a society or a country has to find out how important it is that a certain part of the society shouldn't be on the outside the line, you know, just watching everything, but you want people to cooperate, to do something, you know, to have a right to really speak out and say something. And this is what happened then at those times in Germany, when they found out that all the generations that came after the guest workers, that they were just foreigners, you know, we couldn't really take part in anything. And when I became 18, I wasn't even interested in the elections, since I couldn't vote anyway. You know, it wasn't really something that had to do anything with me, it seemed. But that was so wrong, and we found out. And I think this is something very, very important for every society.
Thank you. From a Commission perspective, I'm not sure I would feel very comfortable talking about citizenship, because this is really something that the member states should decide upon. But I think I would probably follow up on what you just said, that, you know, from the EU perspective, there are so many areas where the situation of migrants or refugees in particular is lagging behind. They are facing barriers in the education and labor market system and so on and so forth, which you are aware more than I am, that from the EU perspective, I tend to agree that we should probably, there are more immediate, issues to tackle and to improve the cooperation and the information and the monitoring of the situation, and then getting back based on indicators so that we know where we are and where to go for that. That these are more of immediate concerns in my view. But again, I do not like to talk about citizenship.
Like back to Sweden, like it's very good example. I'm very proud to talk about it. But unfortunately, we start to have some people and parties, far right, they are talking now to make it more difficult to get the citizenship. Like it was a proposal, for example, to have the language. Was it never before? And how we could work to stop such kind right conditions, or fact it's not right, like discriminate conditions. I believe we should keep talking and acting, and it's very important. Like we have this a project. It started 2 years ago because last year we have also the election in Sweden, to encourage the immigrants themselves to go and vote. Even the people, they have the right to vote. Some of them, they didn't believe in such a system, especially the old people, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of projects like just to convince them to come and vote, to keep this right in your hand. And for example, in our neighbor country, Denmark, the situation was worse. But although last elections a few months ago, it's made some change. And that's because I know a lot of friends, especially from the NGOs, the local community, they didn't stop in the last 8 years, just asking the government, the parliament, not to make it, it's not Denmark, it's not Europe. This is not, we know German, for example, to have this far-right conditions and new policy. And as Tamim mentioned, there is some negative side also from the refugees themselves, and it's very important to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can take probably one more question. Thomas. Unless, I think it's you, Thomas.
Just two quick answers on these points. I mean, on the nationality question, well, NIEM actually already provides a benchmark that it would be useful for UNHCR and for the Commission to use to be able to monitor, say, the naturalization rates of many of these refugee nationalities, in order to then use this objective information on what the obstacles are. Already putting that information out there would be very useful for national actors that don't have this picture. And another quick answer on the funding. The new proposal on AMIF, as you say, will have the 90% co-funding for local authorities. There also will hopefully be the thematic facility, where if member states are not giving out any money, it's possible for the Commission to directly give money in particular countries. That will be very useful. But one of the challenges we will have is the European Social Fund is really meant to be the fund for working on integrated communities, where not only migrants are benefiting, but others are benefiting. And I think that is going to be a challenge for us in our practice to show how not just migrants are benefiting from these integrated measures with natives, but also how non-migrants are benefiting and other communities are benefiting. So my question was, Tamim was talking about the role of refugee leaders and refugee self-organizations in policy making. And you said this comment, refugees need to be honest. But then, I thought, well, actually, the people who are the least honest are politicians. And they don't have to be honest So, for example, we did a simulation where you say, let's say you want your local community to change its policy. How would you do this? And we're talking with refugee leaders, they'd say, well, we'd ask, who is against you? Ah, the far-right politicians. Well, why do you say that? Oh, because the journalists always ask me what I think about what the far-right says. Yes, but do they have a lot of influence on this decision? No. Oh, well, who has influence on this decision? Oh, well, the mayor. Oh, okay, well, who has influence over the mayor? The mayor's church, the mayor's wife, the mayor's party. Okay, then let's talk about who are your allies. And the comments were, yeah, well, there's the integration industrial complex. I said, oh, what is that? Oh, all these NGOs that are making all this money off our backs, and they're not doing anything for us. And then the facilitator was asking, well, what do you ask of them? Because, of course, if you would say that their services were not very useful, they would really lose their funds. So all this kind of discussion, I think, raised to your core question, which is what do you want as in an alliance with other organizations? And I wanted to ask the panel that, can you think of moments where we've been able to come together with an alliance, where you see refugee leaders, NGOs, politicians all pushing for something in common? Because I think when we have that we're fighting for, then we know what we're fighting for, and we of course can be honest because we're all fighting together.
Thank you, Thomas. So it's a brilliant closing question, and also time for honesty.
Except the honesty thing with the politicians.
Who's going to be the first? And I don't know, you also said that you wanted to comment something on citizenship.
Yeah, maybe just, I mean, maybe it is an example. I'm not quite sure yet if it is or not, but it just came into my mind that the mayor of Hamburg once said, like a few years ago, he said, why do we have so many people here who could apply for citizenship, but just don't do it? Just if we look at the papers, it looks like they could just become Germans, have the citizenship, but they don't apply for it. Why? So we started a campaign when he wrote letters. We made a nice letter, honest letter, really nice letter just to invite people to apply for German citizenship. And believe it or not, we had the highest rate of, what do you call it? Naturalization? Yeah. Naturalization, the highest rate in Hamburg, because, I mean, right now it's the British people, actually. That has other reasons. But yeah, but it was really interesting to hear then when we invited them to the town hall, to make a nice celebration, which was also an experience that we had. When I did it, I was at such a table, and the person didn't really know what to do to make it like a celebration. It wasn't just something, it was a citizenship that he gave to me. So we started the celebration at the town hall. And then those people said to us, this is exactly what I was waiting for, that someone calls me or writes me and tells me, hey, you're here for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years maybe, why don't you become German? I invite you to become German. That was our way to write it. And this is what people really wait for, especially when they're in the country for a long time already. Then you can even do something for them by just, telling them, I know that you're here, and I want you, to become part of this society.
And on honesty?
A quick comment on the alliance building, and just one, perhaps a bit of a side perspective on it, but in my experience working in Europe for a number of years, one thing that I noted when we've tried to build alliances is that in some countries where I worked, we've been most successful when we were able to mainstream our refugee issue into other initiatives or other alliances. So let me give you an example. I used to work in Malta, and we did a lot of struggling around refugees' access to work. And we had all kinds of initiatives. But what really made a difference was when that issue was incorporated into the workers' union own agenda, not as a refugee issue, but as a labor rights issue. Similarly, I think when we work with cities, I think it's good that we integrate the refugee migrant issues on on the fundament of what is in the interest of cities, not in terms of what can the cities do for the refugees, how can we integrate the refugee cause within what's already on the agenda for the cities. I know this is happening to a large extent, but I think it can happen even more. Sports is another area where I think we underestimate the power of interaction on a sports field. I've seen it happening many times. So I'm basically, suppose, saying we should also be a bit cautious about always holding up the refugee migrant issue as something that needs rallying around, as opposed to something that we need to bring into society, society's own interest in moving forward an agenda.
Thanks for your comment. Well, no offense, but in general, I don't trust politicians. And that's why I said it's very tricky to also encourage people to be very honest. It's a responsibility to be honest. But if you say, okay, let's build on this topic, woman empowerment, which I mentioned maybe, then maybe a politician in Austria will say, look, refugees told us that women are not willing to, you know, it will change the whole context, the whole discussion. So it's really dangerous. So I would not do that unless there is a guarantee. Well, this is very abstract. There is a guarantee that we are equals, and we really want to have a constructive discussion in shaping policies and in sharing this responsibility. So I know how dangerous it is to raise it at policy level, such topic. But at the end, in reality, even in Austria, I mean, still women are fighting for some of their rights. I mean, this is in every society, even in Europe, in many countries. So I'm not saying, so we need to be very objective in raising the issues, not just accusing the other party just because they are coming from this country or just because they belong to this religion or minority. So this is what I mean, and here I feel confident to raise the issue because most of you are from the civil society, I think. No, don't get me wrong, but I know how tricky it is to raise so these issues. So how to build the alliance? I hope in the future we would be able to have this equal perspective. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, maybe a little difficult topic with this alliance. You know, some people, I think in all societies, try to make one group responsible for all the bad thing that happens. And I think, I mean, it happened with Muslims, for example, quite a lot, right? And it took quite a while in Germany, just to say it honestly, this is a sensitive topic, right? But it took quite a while, and I invited the Jewish community, I invited other communities to the Chancellery, those times, just to discuss, you know, are you sure that it will stay with one group? Or don't you think that this might go on to other group, you know, just switch from one to the other? And do you know what is going on? Should we talk about it? And it took quite a while until, like, there was an alliance then, just to say, okay, this is really something dangerous. If you find out one group, whoever that is, but if you start with one group to blame them, you know, this one group is the one that is complicated, or the criminal ones, or whatever, it's never true. It's never one group because of an ethnic or religious background. But when you start with this and it works, then it works with other groups too. And this was something that, for example, I worked on, and it was good to do it, I guess, because I found out that the groups didn't even know each other. You know, like we had Jewish groups and Muslim groups and Christian groups and, like, you know, all all those people, but some of them didn't know each other. And then so we said, okay, come together, do it in a lot of times, talk to each other and find out, you know, what makes you work together and really walk together. And now I think in some part it works quite well. Not always, not everywhere, but it starts to do it.
Yeah, it's back to Alliance and Aidan point. With another good example also we have in Malmo, that we have the Christian group with Jewish and Muslims with a project, it's called AMIF. This project funded from the government and the municipality and the private sector. And really, it's very important to include the private sector in integration. Like, I have a good example also from Germany. A friend of mine from Homs, he's one of the famous one who makes sweets, was in Homs, and he now in Germany opened his shop, and he have like 80 persons from Syria work with him legally, and he pay the tax. And when I ask him, okay, what's about the integration and what's about the community, how does they deal with you? He told me, Hazem, everyone come to our shop in Berlin, in this famous Arab street. When they enter there, they just told us, thank you, because we need these good examples. Economically, it's very good for the country. We eat a sweet, a very delicious one, and it's giving this positive. And he had a problem once time with his neighbors, and unfortunately he was from another immigrant's background, and how the community itself solved the problem even before the police came to solve these things. And I remember also back to UNHCR and the private sector, there's a conference, a refugee summit in December. I participate in one of the workshops preparing to this summit, and was one important questions to include private sectors. For example, we have in Sweden IKEA, and they have a very good project, like to integrate refugees and the newcomers in the market, even, you know, they have a good funded, and we have this problem now with the European Commission. They asked Sweden to return back almost 900 million Swedish krona because the government, they didn't use it with the asylum seekers. So yeah, I think it's very important to start a dialogue with the private sectors, with each one, connect them. Even you need to invite them and go to them. Come, let's talk about this issue. It will be very good.
Maybe at the final, I very much agree with you, and I mean, it's, for me, it's difficult because all these things that you were talking about, the Commission in the past years has really tried to bring actors together and move things forward under this action plan. I'm not sure to what extent all this was successful. I mean, it's probably, you could tell, you should tell the Commission to what extent the different actions under the action plan were successful, but definitely I think one angle was to involve the private society more, so there was this European partnership for integration with EU-wide employers and initiatives like this. I think that this is where the Commission, the EU, can really have an added value, you know, linking and bringing together the different actors and exchanging, you know, best practices. I'm not sure to what extent politics can be always helpful, but I may be paranoid, you know, here in this topic in this country is so sensitive that I sometimes just don't want to talk about it.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being with us. Unfortunately, our time is up now, so this is what we had for this panel. So I should say a big thank to all the 5 panelists for being with us, for sharing their thoughts, experiences, even sometimes very personal ones with us. And also thank you, audience, to stay till such a late hour of the day. Hope you enjoyed it. And a big applause for the panelists. And I guess we should give the floor back to the organizers, maybe Kasia, to tell us what to do next.
Just a very quick announcement. First of all, I want to, on behalf of the organizers, thank you all very much for coming here today. We're very pleased we have such a large audience and such a diverse audience. I also would like to thank very much the interpreters for providing us with your essential support. And as I said before, all people engaged in providing us technical equipment. Once again, we are very grateful to our donors. And I would like also to thank again very much all my colleagues from the NIEM and V4 NIEM project. Thank you for contributing to this event, for coming here. And just before we part, I wanted to underline that this project is a 6-year-long project. It started 3 years ago, and we have already 3 more years, so it will be continued. And I would like to encourage you to follow our website where we publish the reports, comparative reports covering all countries involving in the projects, and also reports, national reports on particular countries, reports focused on the region, the Visegrad region, and also there you will find updates on what is happening in the project, in the countries involved in the project, about our advocacy work. So please, here you have the website for integration.eu. And this is not the last event we are organizing, of course, under this project. And I hope that you had an interesting day and interesting discussions, a bit of networking too. And I hope we stay in touch. Thank you very much.